The night was heavy with mist as the human walked through the narrow streets of the alien city. Lanterns hung from crooked poles, glowing with strange blue fire. The air smelled of rust, smoke, and fear. The deeper he went, the louder the whispers became. Traders spoke in harsh voices, bargaining over lives as if they were nothing more than objects. Cages rattled, chains dragged against stone, and frightened eyes stared from the shadows. This was the forgotten market, a place where unwanted souls were sold cheap, where dignity was stolen and hope rarely survived. The human kept his head low, trying not to draw attention. He had heard rumors of this place, but seeing it with his own eyes was something else. The market was alive with cruelty. A tall alien with scaled skin shouted about the strength of the creatures in his cages. Another waved his hand over a trembling servant and promised obedience for a fair price. Every step forward revealed something darker, something colder. Then, in the middle of the noise, he saw her. She was small, sitting in a cage too large for her fragile body. Her skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, not dull, but glowing softly, as if it carried its own secret light. Her long hair clung to her shoulders in tangled strands, and her eyes, wide, bright, and filled with something unspoken, met his for a brief second. Fear lived there, but also a quiet strength, a silent plea she could not voice. The seller noticed his pause and laughed. "That one again," he sneered. "She has been bought and returned too many times. Every master brings her back saying, 'She is useless, weak, cursed. She looks pretty, yes, but she is nothing but trouble. A bad investment.'" The crowd chuckled at the words. Some aliens spat near her cage. Others shook their heads as if she was nothing more than waste. The girl lowered her gaze quickly, curling into herself, her thin arms wrapping around her knees as if to make her body disappear. The human stepped closer. He could see the faint marks of chains around her wrists. She did not move, did not speak. It was as if she had been trained to expect rejection. The seller rattled the cage with his boot, making her flinch. "See? Worthless. No voice, no strength, no loyalty. Buyers take her for a night, a week, and then return her. She is broken." The human felt something tighten in his chest. He knew he should walk away. He knew it was dangerous to get involved in such places, but there was something in her silence, in her downcast eyes, that refused to let him leave. "Why do they keep returning her?" he asked. The seller smirked, showing sharp teeth. "Because she cannot be fixed. She is too soft, too strange. She will never fight, never obey as others do. She is a failed creature. Cheap, if you want her. But do not say I did not warn you." The market around them grew louder, as if mocking the very thought of anyone taking her away. Other cages clanged. Voices rose. One alien shouted that he had stronger slaves. Another called out prices for creatures bred for combat. The noise tried to drown the moment, but the human's eyes stayed locked on the girl. She finally looked, up again. For a heartbeat, their gazes met. In that instant, he saw not weakness, but exhaustion, not emptiness, but a quiet plea for mercy. She had been hurt too many times, cast aside too many times, until she stopped hoping. Yet deep inside, her eyes, there was still a spark, faint but alive. The human's hand clenched. Against every reason, every warning, he spoke. "I'll take her." The crowd went silent for a moment, then erupted in laughter. "He wants her," someone shouted. "The broken one," another mocked. The seller grinned, shaking his head. "Your choice, human. Pay the price and she is yours. But remember, everyone returns her in the end." Coins exchanged hands. The cage creaked open. The girl did not move until the seller barked at her to leave. She stepped out slowly, her bare feet silent on the stone floor. She did not look at the human, only kept her head bowed as if already preparing for rejection once again. The human placed his cloak around her shoulders. She froze, unsure of the gesture, her trembling hands clutching the fabric as if she expected it to be taken away. The crowd's mocking laughter faded into the distance as he guided her out of the market. Behind them, the seller called out with a cruel smile, "You will bring her back soon. They all do." But the human did not answer. He only looked once, more at the girl beside him, fragile yet alive, and felt a question rise inside his mind. Had he made a mistake? Or had he just rescued someone who still carried a hidden story no one else could see? The streets outside the market were quieter, but the human could still feel the weight of eyes on his back. A few traders followed him with mocking smiles, whispering that he had wasted his coins on a cursed girl. Some shook their heads as if they already knew how this story would end. Buyers before him had walked this same path, carrying her away only to return her days later. The girl walked behind him, her steps light and careful, almost silent. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, as though the world above had no place for her eyes. She did not ask where they were going, did not speak at all, only followed like a shadow that feared to be noticed. The human wanted to say something, but no words seemed right. What could he tell her? That she was safe now? That she belonged to no cage? That she would never again be thrown away? Would she even believe him after all she had endured? When they reached the small inn where he was staying, the keeper frowned at the sight of the girl. "Another one," the old alien muttered. "Do not waste your room on her, human. That one will only bring you trouble." The human ignored the warning. He guided the girl inside and up the narrow stairs to his rented chamber. The room was plain, one bed, a wooden chair, a small table with a cracked jug of water. He gestured for her to sit, but she remained near the door, her hands clutching the cloak he had given her, her body tense as if waiting for the moment he would push her out. "You can sit," he said gently. She shook her head. He poured some water into a cup and held it out. For a long moment she did not move. Her eyes flickered from the cup to his face, then back again. Slowly, with trembling hands, she reached for it. She drank quickly as though expecting him to snatch it away. The human studied her carefully. She was thin, too thin for someone her age. Her wrists were delicate, her skin marked with faint scars that told stories of chains and rough treatment. She was not broken as the seller claimed. She was bruised by the cruelty of others. Finally, he spoke. "Why do they keep returning you?" Her grip on the cup tightened. She lowered her gaze and whispered so faintly he almost did not hear. "I am not what they want." "What do they want?" Her lips pressed together. For a long silence, she did not answer. Then, with a voice that carried both shame and fear, she said, "They wanted me to fight, to obey without question, to serve without thought. But I could not. When I tried, they said I was weak. When I resisted, they said I was cursed. So they returned me." The human felt a cold anger stir in his chest. She was not weak. She had simply been forced into roles that crushed her spirit. To survive rejection again and again, to still be standing even in silence, that was not weakness. She set the empty cup down on the table and backed away, as if afraid that speaking too much would cost her. The human sighed softly. "I did not buy you to use you," he said. "I will not return you." Her eyes lifted to his face for the first time since leaving the market. There was disbelief in her gaze, a faint spark of hope quickly buried beneath years of pain. She shook her head as if she could not trust those words, as if she had heard promises before, only to have them shattered. The night grew colder. He placed a blanket on the bed and gestured again. "You should rest," he said. "You are safe here." Still she hesitated, but when the air grew too cold for her thin frame, she finally curled on the edge of the bed, clutching the blanket tightly around her. She did not close her eyes for a long time, watching him with guarded suspicion, until exhaustion finally pulled her into uneasy sleep. The human sat in the chair, staring at the dim flame of the lantern. The words of the seller echoed in his mind. Everyone returns her in the end. He wondered what those others had seen, what they had done to her, what weight she carried inside that made her so afraid of hope. But when he looked at her sleeping, face fragile yet still breathing, he felt something he could not ignore. She was not a burden, she was not cursed. She was simply a soul who had never been given the chance to belong. As the night deepened, he made a silent promise. Whatever secrets her past carried, whatever fears made her tremble, he would not treat her as the others had. He would not return her to the cage. The lantern flickered as the night stretched longer. The human stayed awake in the chair, his back stiff, but his eyes fixed on the girl who lay curled at the far edge of the bed. Even in sleep, she did not seem at peace. Her body shifted restlessly, her hands clutching the blanket tight as if someone might snatch it away at any moment. She whispered broken words in her sleep, sounds too soft to understand but filled with dread. The human leaned forward, studying her carefully. She was not like the others he had seen sold in the market. There was no anger in her, no defiance, no sharp claws ready to fight. Instead, there was fear so deep it had hollowed her spirit, and yet something inside her still endured. A sudden movement broke his thoughts. She sat up sharply, her breath uneven, her eyes wide with panic. For a moment she did not seem to know where she was. Her gaze darted across the room, searching for chains, for masters, for punishment. When she saw him, she froze, clutching the blanket tighter as if preparing for the strike she was certain would come. "You are safe," he said quietly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her whole body trembling. She shook her head, pressing herself back against the wall as though trying to vanish into the shadows. The human felt the weight of her fear pressing against him. He stood slowly and poured water into the cup again, placing it gently on the table between them. Then he stepped back, giving her space. "Drink if you wish," he said. For a long moment she did not move. Then as silence stretched, she crawled forward carefully, her eyes never leaving him. She reached the table, grabbed the cup with shaking hands, and drank with quick gulps. She set it down and retreated again, curling into herself. The human spoke softly. "No one will hurt you here. Not while you are with me." She looked at him, confusion mixing with disbelief. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. Her silence was heavy, but in her eyes there was a flicker of conflict, a small part of her that wanted to believe. The hours passed slowly. At last exhaustion pulled her back into a shallow sleep, but even then her body did not relax. She slept like someone who expected to be woken with blows. The human did not close his eyes. He remained in the chair, watching over her, feeling the anger inside him burn stronger. What had she endured to make her so afraid of kindness? How many times had she been tossed aside like a broken tool? When the first light of dawn seeped through the cracked window, the girl stirred again. She blinked at the faint sunbeam falling across the floor, then looked toward the human. He was still awake, his face calm though tired. She whispered one word, barely audible. "Why?" The human tilted his head. "Why what?" "Why not return me?" she said, her voice fragile as though the question itself hurt. He stood and moved closer, stopping a safe distance away. "Because you are not a thing to be returned," he said. "You are not broken. You are alive. That is enough." Her eyes widened slightly. She looked away quickly as if afraid of the hope rising inside her. Others said, "I am weak, worthless." "They lied," he said firmly. Her lips trembled. She pulled the blanket tighter and lowered her gaze again, but he could see the faintest spark of warmth trying to reach the surface. Breakfast came from a knock at the door, bread and fruit left on a tray. The human placed some on a plate and offered it to her. She stared at it, unsure, then took it with careful fingers. She ate slowly, as though expecting him to snatch it away at any moment. He let her eat in silence. The room filled with the sound of her small bites, the faint creak of the chair, the distant noise of the waking city. For the first time since he met her, the human felt something shift. She had spoken, even if only a few words. She had taken food without punishment. Perhaps slowly she would begin to trust. But deep in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning. The scars on her body were nothing compared to the wounds hidden inside her mind. To heal those would take more than one night, more than one kind gesture. It would take patience, strength, and a promise never to abandon her, no matter how much the world laughed at the thought. He glanced at her again. She sat with the blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes lowered, but a tiny piece of bread still in her hand, uneaten. She seemed lost in thought, as if weighing his words, wondering if she could dare to believe them. The human leaned back in his chair, his voice quiet, but steady. "You are safe with me. I will not return you." She did not answer, but this time, she did not look away. The days passed slowly, each one a careful step forward. The girl remained quiet, speaking little, her voice soft as if it belonged to someone else. She moved through the room like a shadow, always cautious, always expecting the smallest kindness to vanish. Yet, with every sunrise, the human noticed small changes. She began to eat without waiting for his command. She drank water without trembling, as much, and sometimes when she thought he was not watching, her eyes lingered on the light coming through the window as though it was something she had almost forgotten how to admire. But the nights told a different story. She often woke with sudden gasps, her body shaking, her hands clutching the blanket so hard her knuckles turned pale. Once he woke to the sound of a muffled cry. When he looked closer, he saw her covering her mouth with her hands, tears running down her face. She did not notice him watching, and he did not interrupt, but the sight filled his chest with anger and sorrow. On the fourth night, the truth began to reveal itself. The lantern burned low as he shifted in the chair, half asleep. The blanket slipped from the girl's shoulder as she turned in her restless sleep. That was when he saw them. Thin lines, pale but unmistakable, crossed her arms and back. Scars, not from work, but from punishment. The marks were too deliberate, too cruel, carved into her skin by hands that wanted her to suffer. The human's fists tightened. His jaw locked as a storm of thoughts raged through his mind. Every word the seller had spoken, useless, cursed, broken, echoed with new meaning. She was not weak. She had been wounded, over and over, until her spirit carried the weight of each scar. The girl stirred and woke. When she saw him staring, she pulled the blanket tightly around her body, her eyes wide with fear. She whispered quickly, "Do not send me back. Please do not return me." The human stood slowly, raising his hands to calm her. "I will not, I promise you. But tell me, who hurt you?" Her lips trembled. For a long silence she did not speak. Then she looked away, her voice broken. "All of them. Every place they took me. They said I was too quiet, too strange. They wanted me to fight. They wanted me to obey. When I could not, they made me bleed. When I cried, they said I was cursed. When I begged, they laughed. Then they sent me back, and others came to take me away again, each time worse than before." Her hands shook as she held the blanket tighter. "No one ever wanted me to stay. No one ever wanted me to belong." The human's heart burned with rage, but his voice was steady. "They were wrong. You are not cursed. You are not broken." She shook her head quickly. "You do not know. You will see. You will return me too." "I will not," he said firmly, stepping closer. "I did not take you from that cage to throw you back. I see you. Not a tool, not a servant, not something to be bought or sold. I see you." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were different from the tears of fear he had seen before. These were tears of confusion, of fragile hope pressing against years of despair. She buried her face in the blanket, unable to face him, but her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. The human did not touch her, not yet. He knew trust was fragile, and a single wrong step could break it. Instead, he sat on the floor near the bed, close enough that she would feel his presence, far enough that she would not feel trapped. "You do not need to fear me," he said quietly. "The scars you carry, they are not your fault. You survived what others could not. That is not weakness. It is strength." Her sobs grew softer, then faded into silence. She peeked out from the blanket, her eyes red, her face pale. For the first time since he had taken her, she did not look at him with fear, but with a question. Could she believe him? The lantern flickered, shadows dancing on the wall, and in that moment, the bond between them deepened. Not yet trust, not yet safety, but the first fragile thread of connection. She had shown him her scars not by choice but by truth, and he had not turned away. As dawn crept into the room, the girl whispered so softly he almost missed it. "Will you keep me?" The human's voice was steady, firm as stone. "Yes, forever." Morning light filled the small room, soft and golden. The girl sat by the window, wrapped in the blanket, her eyes following the rising sun. She seemed different from the frightened figure of the night before. Her body was still tense, but there was a quiet calm in the way she watched the world outside, as though the light itself gave her something she had long forgotten. The human placed a small plate of bread and fruit on the table. "Eat," he said gently. She looked at it, then at him, waiting as if unsure if it was truly for her. When he nodded, she moved closer, her steps light and careful. She picked a piece of bread, held it for a moment, then ate slowly. He noticed the way her eyes softened as she chewed. She was not rushing this time, not hiding her hunger and fear. For days they repeated the same rhythm. He offered food. She accepted with less hesitation. She no longer curled in the corner of the bed, but sat near the table, close enough to share the same space. When he spoke, she listened, though she rarely answered with more than a whisper. Yet every word she gave him was a victory, a sign that something inside her was beginning to change. One afternoon, as he returned from the market, he found her standing in the room instead of sitting silently. She had arranged the water jug and cups neatly on the table, as if trying to bring some order to the space. When he entered, she stepped back quickly, nervous that she had done something wrong. "You did well," he said with a faint smile. Her lips parted, her eyes wide, then she looked away quickly. But he saw it, the faintest trace of a smile before she hid it. Trust was growing slowly, like a seed pushing through dry soil. It was fragile, but it was alive. That night, when he handed her a piece of fruit, her hand brushed his for a second. She flinched, but this time she did not retreat fully. Instead, she took the fruit and held it close, her eyes flickering toward him with confusion. He did not move closer, did not force the moment. He let it be, knowing each step had to be hers. The following morning, the girl surprised him. As he prepared to leave for supplies, she whispered, "I can help." He stopped, turning toward her. It was the first time she had offered anything of her own. "Help with what?" he asked gently. She lowered her gaze. "Carry things, clean, anything." The human thought carefully. She was not ready for the crowded streets, not ready to face the voices that once mocked her. But giving her a task could give her purpose, a sense that she belonged. He handed her the empty jug. "Fill this with water. The well is behind the inn. Stay close." She clutched the jug as though it were heavy with meaning. Walking beside him, she stepped into the daylight. The streets were busy, but she kept close to his side, her eyes darting at every sound. At the well, she filled the jug with careful hands, glancing at him as if expecting him to take it away. When he let her carry it back herself, she held it, tightly, her arms trembling with effort but her face steady with pride. Back in the room, she set the jug down and looked at him, waiting for judgment. He nodded. "Good." A breath escaped her lips, almost a laugh, though she stopped it quickly. Each day after, she did a little more. She arranged the bed, swept the floor with an old cloth, brought water without being asked. These small actions seemed to give her a reason to lift her head higher, a reason to stay close without fear. One evening, as the lantern glowed softly, he saw her sitting on the floor with the blanket around her shoulders. She was humming, a sound so quiet it almost vanished into the air. When she noticed his eyes on her, she stopped, startled, but he said softly, "It was beautiful." Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away, but for the first time her lips curved into a clear smile. It was faint, trembling, but it was real. The human felt something stir inside him, not just compassion but connection. She was no longer a shadow, no longer just the girl rejected by all. She was beginning to be herself, a person with a voice, a presence, and a spirit trying to rise again. The nights grew calmer. She no longer woke with sharp cries, though her dreams still troubled her. When fear came, she no longer hid from him, completely. Sometimes she looked to him for reassurance, and when he gave it, she clung to his words like they were a shield. The bond between them was no longer silent. It was fragile, yes, but it was growing stronger each day. And deep inside, the human knew this was only the beginning. Word of the human and the girl spread faster than he expected. Whispers carried through the narrow alleys from the market stalls to the inn's doorway. The rejected girl who had been sold and returned so many times was still with him. Days had passed, and he had not sent her back. To some it was amusing, to others suspicious, and to a few it was an insult. It began with stares in the marketplace. When the human walked to buy food, traders glanced at him with mocking smiles. One of them muttered loud enough for him to hear, "He still has her, the broken one." Another chuckled, "He thinks she is worth keeping. Let us see how long before he learns." The human ignored them, but the words followed him like shadows. Back, at the inn, the girl sensed it too. She sat by the window, her hands gripping the blanket tightly. "They know," she whispered when he returned. "They will come." He crouched down so she would see his face. "Let them come. You are with me now." That night his words were tested. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. A loud knock shook the wooden door. The girl froze, her eyes wide with terror. She backed into the corner, curling into herself, as if expecting to be dragged away. The human stood steady and calm and opened the door. 3 figures entered, 2 alien traders from the market, and 1 tall, scaled buyer he recognized. The buyer sneered. "Human, we heard you kept her." "That was foolish. She belongs to no one. She is cursed. Give her back." The human's jaw tightened. "She is not yours. She is not anyone's to take." The buyer laughed, a low and cruel sound. Every master said the same at first. Then they learned the truth. She cannot serve, she cannot obey, she is nothing but weakness. Return her or sell her to me cheap, and I will rid you of the trouble. Behind him, the girl trembled, her breath uneven. Her eyes begged silently. Not for freedom, but for protection. She had no strength left to run, no voice left to fight. The human stepped between her and the intruders. "No," he said firmly. "She is under my care. You will not touch her." The room grew tense. The taller alien hissed, his scaled skin glistening in the lantern light. "You think you can protect her? She has no value. She has only brought shame to every hand that tried to keep her. What makes you different?" The human's eyes did not waver. "Because I see her for what she is, not for what you tried to make her." The words struck the air like steel. The traders exchanged looks, surprised by his conviction. They had expected fear, maybe even surrender, but not defiance. The scaled buyer snarled, stepping closer. The human did not move. His stance was firm, his gaze sharp. The silence stretched, broken only by the girl's trembling breaths. At last, the buyer spat on the floor. "Foolish human, you will regret this. She will break you as she broke the others. When she does, remember this moment." With that, he turned and stormed out, the others following behind. The door slammed shut. The room was heavy with silence. The girl sat frozen in the corner, her hands pressed against her chest. Her wide eyes followed him as he locked the door. For a moment she did not speak, then her voice broke through in a whisper. "You stood for me." The human walked toward her, kneeling down. "I told you. I will not return you." Her lips trembled, her body shaking. Tears filled her eyes, not of fear, but of something she had never felt before. "No one ever stood for me," she whispered. He placed the blanket around her shoulders again. "Then remember this. You are not alone now." She pressed the fabric to her face, muffling her sobs. This time they were not cries of terror, but of release, of relief. The weight of countless rejections had pressed her down, but for the first time someone had faced the world and chosen her. The night grew quiet. She did not hide from him as before. Instead, she leaned closer, her trembling hands gripping the edge of his sleeve as if to anchor herself to the promise he had given. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe. Maybe he would not return her. Maybe she truly had found someone who would keep her safe. The bond between them, fragile and new, had just been tested by the outside world. And it had held. The days after the confrontation passed with a new kind of silence. The girl still moved carefully, still flinched at sudden sounds, but there was a difference now. She no longer watched the door in constant fear. Instead, she watched the human. When he returned from the market, her eyes would follow him until he sat down. When he spoke, she listened closely, as though every word was a thread tying her to safety. She began to change in small but powerful ways. She no longer curled in the corner at night but rested nearer to the center of the bed, no longer gripping the blanket like a shield but holding it like comfort. She no longer ate as if someone would take the food from her hand but savored it slowly. Her laughter, soft and unsure, escaped once when he made a small mistake slicing fruit, and though she quickly covered her mouth, the sound lingered in the room like sunlight. One evening, as the lantern glowed warm against the walls, the human returned to find the room different. The bed was neatly arranged, the cups placed in a straight line, and a flower rested on the table, simple, fragile, plucked from the street outside. The girl stood near the window, her hands nervously twisting the edge of her dress. "You did this?" he asked gently. She nodded, her cheeks warming with color. "I wanted to make it yours, to make it ours." The human felt something shift inside him. She had spoken more in those few words than in all the weeks before. It was not just survival anymore, not just fear slowly fading. It was belonging, the beginning of something she had been denied all her life. That night she sat closer than ever before. When he told her stories of places he had traveled, she listened with wide eyes. When she asked questions in her quiet voice, he answered everyone with patience. And when her head grew heavy, she leaned against his arm, trembling at first, but then settling with a sigh. "Why do you keep me?" she whispered, half asleep. The human looked down at her fragile form, her scars, her tired but shining eyes. "Because you are not something to be kept. You are someone to be cared for. You belong not in a cage but in a home, and you are home here with me." Her breath caught, and she pressed her face into his sleeve. "No one has ever said that," she whispered. "Then let this be the first time," he replied. The next morning, when she rose from the bed, there was no hesitation in her steps. She stood taller, her shoulders no longer weighed down completely by fear. She helped him pack supplies, carried things without waiting to be told, and when they left the inn together, she walked beside him, not behind. Some still mocked. Traitors sneered as they passed, shaking their heads, whispering that he was a fool. But she no longer lowered her eyes at every word. She stayed near him, holding the cloak he had given her, and for the first time her gaze lifted toward the horizon instead of the ground. By the end of the week, they had left the city behind. The road stretched wide, the air cleaner, the stars brighter above. The girl looked at them with awe, her lips parting in wonder. "I never thought I would see this," she said softly. The human smiled. "You will see more. You are free now." Tears filled her eyes, but they were not the tears of fear he had first seen. They were tears of release, of hope, of something long buried coming alive. She turned to him, her voice trembling. "You gave me more than freedom. You gave me a place. You gave me a home." She took his hand, hesitant but steady. Her small fingers wrapped around his, and for the first time, she held on as though she had the right to. The human squeezed her hand gently. "Yes," he said. "Forever." The stars stretched above them, endless and bright. The road ahead was unknown, filled with challenges they could not yet see. But for the first time, she was not afraid of what waited. For the first time, she was not rejected, not returned, not unwanted. She belonged. And as they walked forward together, the human knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it as one. He had not just saved her from the cage. He had given her what no one else ever had, a forever home,